Well, friends, you've done it. You've clicked on a thing maybe you shouldn't have, and you've wound up in the space that is the literal actualization of the fear that went through every parent's heart when their child said, I think I'd like to be a theater major, or as we call it, Milwaukee Chamber Theater's drunk dramaturgy. My name is Brent Hazelton. I am Milwaukee Chamber Theater's incoming artistic director. With me, as always, is Kimberly Colburn, rocking the pink hair today, as well as a very on-point 90s vibe. And with us, our super special guest, who we're so delighted to have roped into this inanity, is Angie Morgan, literary manager and dramaturg at the American Shakespeare Center in Stanton, Virginia. And thank you so much for hanging out with us.
Thanks for inviting me to be a part of this.
What are you drinking?
I am drinking a Negroni because it is my go-to festive drink, and I have not been out in the world in quite some time, and this seemed like an opportunity for festivity.
But we're going to talk about my absolute favorite subject.
Yeah.
Food.
Yeah.
Food specifically through the lens of the food industry. Very early in the days of beginning to date my now boyfriend, who is a pastry chef and baker, I was trying to explain to him not just what it is that I do, but sort of the context in which it fits. And I was explaining that new plays are harder to sell because they are unknown. Nobody has heard of the play. It has never been seen before an audience, and that harder to sell and sometimes makes less money. So a producing theater will frequently produce something else in their season to sort of balance out that risk, like a Christmas Carol. I'm explaining all of this, and he was like, oh, so it's like almond croissants. And I was like, excuse me? And he was like, yeah, it's like almond croissants. And he went on to explain that while he sometimes gets bored with making almond croissants, they are a known quantity and they are very popular and they are very good. And because of that, the almond croissants he makes and sells in his bakery allow him to make cannelé, which is a much less well-known and much more finicky pastry that he really, really enjoys making.
So almond croissants are a Christmas carol.
Almond croissants are a Christmas carol.
Fantastic.
Yeah. And that that was sort of the light bulb moment for me. And then the more I started thinking about it, the more sort of connections I saw between the food industry and the theater industry. And I do say theater industry because my background is institutional dramaturgy and working within producing organizations. One of the reasons that I find these sorts of parallels that I am finding in this line of thinking really helpful for me in my work is that they're really pragmatic, and that I think sometimes when talking to only theater people, we get wrapped up in the artistry and the mystery, and talking to non-theater people or talking about theater work in non-theatrical ways sort of takes away the mystery and forces us to take away some of our excuses.
Actually, it's not that people are so imbued with genius. It's that they're too fucking lazy to tell someone what they're doing.
Exactly. It's like a little bit of genius and then like a lot of, I don't actually want to let you into my process. One of the things that I really love about plays or like recipes is thinking about like, who is the consumer? If you're working at any type of restaurant, someone is going to eat it who is not you. And so you're thinking about that person, you're thinking about your audience member from the start, which feels really important to me. I feel like too frequently we are not thinking about the audience enough.
So you think playwrights have to think about who's going to eat my play?
Exactly. Other than
but yes.
Yes. I think the other thing that metaphor does for me is that good food does two things, right? It actually keeps us alive and it gives us pleasure. And I think there's a spectrum in theater of like theater makers who are like, this is vital to like the idea of being human, which is real. And like, it's just entertainment. People just want to have a good time, which is also real.
Mhm.
But if you look at the theater, a play as a recipe model, you're sort of forced to reckon with both things, right? You can't give your audience salmonella, and like probably it should be tasty. So a recipe, it has ingredients, which is like, okay, here are your actors, here's what you need for your set, all of that. And it has an order of events. You do this, and then you do this other thing, and then you do this other thing. And hopefully, if you've done all of those things correctly, it culminates in an experience that if it's a food product, you consume. If it's a play, you sort of come away with that theatrical experience. And I think one question that has been useful for me dramaturgically is to try and think about like what the recipe is, right? Like there are a million different ways to make a cookie, and all of those things are cookies, but they're not pies, right? So like what is the play? And some of this is genre and some of this is style. But like what is the play trying to be? What is the recipe trying to be? I can look at a script that I think wants to be a cookie and offer some suggestions for like how it can be the best cookie possible, or pie, but like only the playwright can decide what the play wants to be. And I do feel like I'm a little bit replicating the like creme brulee jello conversation from my best friend's wedding right now. And I like
Totally okay.
I like actually feel like that kind of works. And like I'm sure you've seen a production where like the production thought the play was a creme brulee and the playwright thought it was jello. Or
over and over
one
again.
actor thought they were doing creme brulee and everybody else thought they were doing jello, right? Like,
Yep.
But this is so much of what it is to bake a new play, right? Like that first pass through, you're just figuring out what are we serving here?
What are we all making?
What are we
Exactly.
making? I appreciate the desire to differentiate a work of art, to make it unique from all of the other work of art. But I think that only serves you to a point. I think there is a point where it's useful to say, this is a cookie or this is a creme brulee. And there are, again, a number of different ways to get at that same thing. And that's what makes the play unique. But the writer has to decide that.
So if the premise is that you follow a recipe to bake a thing, and that some of it does have to do with genre, is there an example of, if you're trying to bake X, these are the ingredients that you have to use? Do you have any of those recipes at your disposal as dramaturgical nuggets of wisdom?
Ooh, that's a great question. I think probably the most easy sort of go-to for that is like if you look at the works of Shakespeare.
That's funny. Did you know you work at a Shakespeare theater?
I had heard something about that, yeah. But I think, and part of this, again, as you're pointing out, has to do with the way that I think about my day job, which is plays that have a lot of characters, plays that do not require lots of technical elements, plays that acknowledge the audience. Shakespeare's plays also tend to have 5 acts. He tends to be open to supernatural elements. They tend to progress in chronological order, though he will take jumps in that order. He doesn't do flashbacks. But so I think if you're like, what is the recipe for a Shakespeare play? I would be able to be like, here are the ingredients. In terms of the ingredients, though, not so much in terms of whether you're making a pie or cookies or whatever other sort of thing, but that's one of the sort of variables that makes even the same play different from production to production. are you using like locally sourced eggs from a chicken that's just been like wandering around your backyard, or eggs from the Kroger down the street? These are all things that affect your production, which may or may not impact the efficacy of the play itself. I think another thing that I've like really hooked into, weirdly, I don't know why, is ovens are really temperamental. Like even the oven in my apartment, like not
Oh my God,
Yes.
not just, but like I'm not a cook, but like I can make a mean Toll House cookie. But even the Toll House cookie recipe says bake for 9 to 11 minutes or until your cookie looks like this. Because everyone's oven is different.
Mm-hmm.
And every theater space is different. Every company of actors are different. And like, I think it is up to the artistic team to really be mindful of not recreating the Toll House cookie recipe that worked in the Toll House test kitchen, but what is particularly right for that space, this community, this time.
Trying to create this amazing meal in the theater, right? Like this, the transformative, unforgettable, you sit down at the table and it's just the best 5 courses you can possibly have.
Right.
But let's also be real for a second. Sometimes you just want to like drive through McDonald's, right?
Yes, and there's nothing wrong with that. There's a place for that as well. And I think I was telling you earlier about one of my favorite restaurants where you can get really, really high quality food and you can get the best burger I've ever had in my life.
Yeah.
And I think the subscription model is dying, and like maybe it will die of coronavirus, TBD.
We'll see.
No, not yet.
But I understand the impulse of it, right? Like I understand, especially in this extended and elongated metaphor, I understand the relationship that an audience member or that a person might have with a restaurant where I know I'm gonna have a good meal there, whatever I order from the menu. Like that makes sense to me. Mm-hmm. I think there's a lot of other stuff that may or may not make sense in the like actual application to theater, but I get that.
It reminds me of my favorite restaurant in Santa Ana, California, The Playground, which I think this is still true. They have a 1-star Yelp review that's printed on their door about how they don't make substitutions and they don't make allowances. And so they do not change their food for you, and they're unapologetic about it. And I feel like that is a lesson that theater could take from that restaurant, which is you actually should never try to please all of the people all of the time. It's impossible. And neither should you bend over backwards for the people who aren't going to like what you're serving. That means they're in the wrong restaurant.
And we know this from new play experiences, right? Anytime you try to crowdsource new play development, the play's terrible. It's terrible. Because the individual perspective of the writer at the center of it is just bled out of the thing through so many workshops or trying to accommodate everyone's different ideas. Hey, we have to, just like a great restaurant, you must have that singular perspective at your core. There's my favorite restaurant in Milwaukee, this place called Odd Duck, which is a small plate joint. Same deal. Like you're going to go in there and you're going to have a transcendent experience with half a dozen small plates, but you're getting what they're cooking.
Yeah.
And if you want something changed out of there, you just pick a different plate. You know? So
basically Anne's metaphor has solved theater.
I mean, that's what I'm feeling right now.
I think,
and it's also made me
I feel like that's our button.
hungry.
That's our button.